Well, as we've been saying all evening, the panel that's sitting in Pretoria interviewing the 6 candidates who want to become the next Director of Public Prosecutions have now concluded the interview process itself. The final 2 candidates from this afternoon and this evening were advocates Hermione Cronier, who was the initial leader for IDAC, the investigating office that was created in the NPA about 7 years ago. Today, the final candidate to be interviewed this evening, in fact, was former National Director of Public Prosecutions, Advocate Simelani. Let's talk more about this now with senior researcher at the Dalla Omar Institute at the University of the Western Cape, Dr. Jean Redpath. Good to have you on the program again, Doctor. So let's start with Simelani, because going into the process already, his shortlisting had been contentious. He's defended himself around the circumstances that led to basically his appointment being declared invalid at the time, about 13 years ago. But is there any scenario realistically here where he could ascend?
Well, there's always the outside possibility that he could be appointed, but in all likelihood, such an appointment could be challenged and set aside. If it was set aside previously, it can be set aside again. And he was quite blatant in the interview today about certain decisions that he'd taken, and that he didn't read the dockets, and he made assumptions about the motivations of the Scorpions. The Bosasa matter, for example, which our courts are currently seized with. So, you know, we have a choice. We can go back to the state capture era, or we can move forward. If Simelani is the choice, we are going to go back.
And on the Bosasa issue that you referenced, he said quite explicitly that he chose not to sign off on the prosecution proceeding because he simply did not trust the Scorpions at the time, which leads me then to my next question about how damning that is ultimately when you've got these organizations, these agencies that are supposed to work or step in tandem, if you will, for the safety and security and justice in this country, when there is a lack of trust. How problematic is that?
Yes, I think what we have to remember is the negative findings around Simelani were made when he was Director General of Justice, not when he was National Director. And he interfered and stopped Vusi Pikoli, who by many people who is thought to be one of the better national directors that South Africa has had. And it's very concerning that he is even considered for this post. Now, obviously, there's always going to be contention between different agencies. And what that really requires is proper leadership to negotiate, to talk, to communicate between the different agencies, and a real desire to do the right thing. And it's absolutely not clear that that is what Simelani stands for.
So to be clear, would I be right in saying, Doctor, that ultimately if Simelani, for example, is not among the people recommended or the person recommended to President Ramaphosa by this panel for appointment, is it more to do with the fact that ultimately if he were to become National Director of Public Prosecutions again, he would present, shall we say, more of a political problem than one that has to do with competence, the ability to do the job?
Well, I think that is part of the problem. And you know, the number one requirement to do the job is to be a fit and proper person. And when you have lied, when you have been dishonest, when a judge has found you to have lied and be dishonest, then you know, you cannot be National Director. So it's not just a political decision. It is also his performance today, to be honest. He was quite blatant in his position on certain things. He was celebrating the fact that he was the architect of the legislation that took down the Scorpions, which quite frankly was the beginning of the end of prosecutions of corruption in South Africa. So, you know, we can go backwards or we can go forwards.
I don't want us to get bogged down with the Scorpions and what happened at the time, because ultimately that's a conversation that could go on, I suspect, for hours all on its own in terms of the decisions that were made and how that's led us to the point where we are. But in the time that we've got left, I do want us to go and talk about Advocate Cronier, who was interviewed just before Advocate Simelani today. What kept coming up as a complication, shall we say, during her session, even in the submissions that were received by the panel, was that there are people who feel while she is qualified, she is not the sort of candidate who would be willing to stay the course if it's not smooth sailing. Is that a fair assessment?
No, I don't think it's a fair assessment. I mean, I think what she was challenging the minister, she was saying, if you can buy into my vision, if you can provide the resources that I require, if you can change the legislation so that prosecutors are recognized as legal practitioners and properly trained to be part of the profession, if you can give me more control over the layer underneath me, which is the directors of public prosecutions, then I will stay. And I think that's what she also alluded to in her previous term of office, was how hard she tried to make it work.
And the point that
she approached the minister, she approached the president, and yeah, so the point is, you can't keep banging your head against a brick wall. At some point, you have to stop. And
the point that was made, and I'm paraphrasing here, by Minister Mameloko Kubai, is that there is still a brick wall if Cronier was to be appointed, right, by 1st of February to take over, because ultimately she wouldn't have everything that she wants, including being able to run the NPA in a way that she believes would be most effective, disciplining deputies, etc. The resources, those things would not be in place on the 1st of February. So how do you test that? Because the last time when she was at IDAC, when things did not go her way, she didn't stay and finish her term. So what guarantees that this time she won't simply bail after a year or two of not getting what she wanted?
Well, I think, I don't think she bailed immediately. I think she, she was there from 2019. She set up the office. When she set up the office, they had only 35 people. Now they have more than 100, close to 200. So I think she did a lot of work in setting it up, getting it in place. She wrote lots of memos. She wrote to the minister. She wrote to the president. And I think there does come a point, and she was quite clear that the vision, her vision and that of Advocate Patoy's was different. And so she wanted to give space for Advocate Patoy's vision, Advocate Patoy's approach, which was a much more conciliatory, sort of non-confrontational approach to play out. And we've seen it play out, and some people may think that it was, in some ways, yes, it was what was needed at the time. But I think now perhaps something different is needed. I think other commentators have said that what is needed now is a disruptor, not to continue with what we have at the moment.
Dr. Jean Redpath, good to talk to you as always. Senior researcher with the Dalla Omar Institute at the University of the Western Cape, speaking to us about the interviews of candidates who've been shortlisted to possibly become the country's National Director of Public Prosecutions in the new year.